Good afternoon, boys and girls. I've got some delicious chocolatey thunder cake that I made last night during the storm. I'm not sure any of you joined me in the challenge, but I made a little video clip. So whenever I get a break from grading papers and answering emails and having video chats with my colleagues and making books, online read alouds for children, I might get to that. Today I'm sitting outside because it's beautiful. It's not raining. The sun is out. I hope right now you're not watching this. I hope right now you are outside trying to climb a tree or make a fort or hike in the woods or dig a big hole in your backyard and make mud. With your parents' permission, of course. But it's gorgeous, so I decided to sit outside today. And today we are going to finish up Trixie Belden and the Red Trailer Mystery, which solves everything that we've been working toward. What will Jim's decision be? That's what we're going to find out today. I do have my tea here. I'm thinking about maybe calling this tea time because I like filming these in the afternoon. It's just a nice break and time for tea, although this is kind of cold. I need to call the waitress over. Waitress, heat my tea. Anyway, we're going to get on started today, and then I want you to start thinking about what book we want to read next, because this is going to be it. And once you've graduated, that means you've either read the whole book yourself or you've listened to me read it to you. Then I will allow you to borrow books from me, other Trixie Belden books that I've said, no, you can't read that. You can't read that next. You have to finish this. All right, we're graduating today. You ready? Let's get started. Chapter 18, Jim's Decision. Joanne jumped out of her chair, knocking it over and spilling her milk at the same time. Mr. Darnell, his face wreathed in smiles, pushed by Farmer Smith and gathered his daughter into his arms. It took you long enough, Mrs. Smith told her husband, trying hard to keep back the tears, gathered his daughter into his arms. It took you long enough, Mrs. Smith told her husband, trying hard to keep back the tears as she watched Joanne cling to her father. The tall, thin man folded himself tiredly into a straight-backed chair. Tramped every inch of the woods on both sides of the road, he said in a monotone. Found the camp where Win here was hiding out before he came to work for us. You were right about him too, Mary. Saw his name on a christening mug under the blanket on his bunk. Mrs. Smith rocked back and forth placidly. We've been married 30 years, she told Honey and Trixie, and yet it never fails to surprise Nat when I'm right. Go on, Lamb, she urged her husband. Where did you finally find the Darnells? I followed the stream by Wynn's camp, Mr. Smith continued, and then I heard a dog barking. Sounded as though it came from Frog Hollow, and sure enough, it did. In a few been delayed 60 seconds, I would have lost the best man I have ever hired. No, you wouldn't, Mr. Darnell said quietly, still holding Joanne close to him. I was on my way over here to ask you if you'd take me back after I returned Mr. Lynch's trailer. Oh, Daddy, Joanne cried, are we going to live with the Smiths? Please, Daddy, I'd rather live here than anywhere in the whole world. Mrs. Smith dabbed at her eyes with the corner of her apron. I declare, she said to her husband, the Lord is certainly looking out for us. Here I was counting on 3 children to fill up those empty bedrooms, and now we're going to have 5. Jim Frain's going to stay on too, Nat. You tell him he has to, although what use he'll have here for $500,000 is more than I can say. She turned on Jim, scolding, to disguise her fear that he might not stay. If you must go to college, I suppose you must. But you'll earn your bed and board vacation time, I can tell you. There'll be no lying abed this house, even on Christmas Day. What with snow to be shoveled and logs to be cut and corn to be popped for 4 little hungry children. Jim's eyes were misted as he grinned at Mrs. Smith. I'll be here my very first Christmas vacation, he promised, and Thanksgiving too, if you'll have me. At that, Honey burst into tears. I want him for my brother, she wailed unashamedly. You don't need him, Mrs. Smith, not with all the Darnells. But I haven't anybody. Mrs. Smith came to the rescue. There, there, he said soothingly. Pay no attention to Mary. She's never satisfied, no matter how many blessings the good Lord bestows on her. 7 sons of her own she has, and 5 grandsons, I must say. I'd like to have young Frayne stay with us, but if you have other plans for him, so be it. Trixie could not help laughing at the way people were calmly arranging Jim's life for him. He winked at her and stood up. It's dry enough now to work in the garden. Let's all go pick beans. We'll do nothing of the kind, Mrs. Smith bristled. If Mr. Darnell will kindly go and get the rest of his family, I'll try to scrape up enough food for a party. We'll have a celebration this very afternoon, beans or no beans. I never cared for them anyway, nasty, tasteless things, unless drowned in fresh butter. Get to your baking, Mary, Mr. Smith said mildly. I can finish the beans myself. Jim, did so much yesterday morning there's hardly a bushel left on the vines. These girls, he said in his flat, expressionless voice, would like to have you to themselves, I think. For a little while anyway. Come back for tea, all of you. But right now, let's clear out this kitchen. Mary likes to be alone when she bakes. Mrs. Smith was already yanking pie tins out of a corner cupboard and did not seem to notice when the others filed out the back door. Mr. Smith headed for the garden, and Mr. Darnell and Joanne started down the driveway toward the Macadam Road. I don't know how to pronounce that. I looked it up for the pronunciation. Macadam. It means like a road of pebbles. Macadam, I think is how you say it. Never heard of it before. I'll have to keep working on that. Trixie grabbed Jim's hand. Come on, she cried. We'll cut through the orchard and the fields to the Ottoville. I can't wait to show you to Miss Trask and telephone Mr. Rainsford that we found you. I still can't believe it, Honey sighed as she hurried along on the other side of Jim. Now, if only Mother... Shh! Trixie stopped her. Let's not talk about that now. I want to hear what Jim's been doing since he left the mansion. Well, there isn't much to tell, Jim said. I bought a bike and headed for this part of the country. Rigged up a camp in the woods and tried to get a job at one of those boys' camps I told you about. But no luck. I found Joanne caught by her hair to a bramble bush and turned my camp over to her while I moved to the old barn down there in the hollow. He grinned. You seem to know more about those trailer thieves than I do, although how you knew I loosened the core valve on their tire is more than I can guess. Trixie explained, and when she had finished, Jim chuckled. If I'd only known Mr. Darnell was on their trail too, I wouldn't have worried so. But as a matter of fact, I was pretty sure the troopers would find that van while it was still hitched up to the stolen trailer. Then all they had to do was wait there calmly until Al and Jeff came back with the jack. That's why I just tossed it into an empty stall instead of taking it with me. I wanted them to go back to the van and get caught, you see? In between fixing that tire and hiding the jack, Honey said thoughtfully, you must have been picking beans in the Smith's garden. That's right, Jim said. Early yesterday morning, I got Joanne and we biked to the farmhouse. I'd bought her a second-hand bike the day before in the village. We didn't really stop at the Smiths to get a job, but to try to find out if Joanne's father had tried to get work there. It seemed logical, you know, that he would want to settle down in the same part of the country where he spent his boyhood. Say, he interrupted himself suddenly, Wilson Ranch is a swell place. I'd sure like to get a job there. You can now, Honey said in a sad little voice. But oh, Jim, I do wish you'd spend the rest of the summer with us. Now, Honey, Trixie cried impatiently, don't start that again. Wait until Jim meets your family. Jim chuckled. If they're half as nice as you, Honey, I'll be satisfied. What were you saying about our fathers going to school together? They did, Honey said. Mr. Rainford told me so. He wants to appoint Dad as your guardian, you see. That would be swell, Jim said enthusiastically. But maybe when your dad gets a look at me, he won't want the bother of it. Man, that sun, it just turned on full. Full beam. It's probably messing up the door. Pinned to it was a note from Miss Trask. Come right over to the cafeteria. It can't be lunchtime yet, Honey wondered out loud. What does she want over there? Trixie shrugged. Let's go. We can telephone Mr. Rainsford from there. But Mr. Rainsford himself was waiting for them in the lounge, and even more surprising was the sight of Honey's father and mother, who, with Miss Trask and the lawyer, were gathered around a large table in one corner of the room. Mother, Honey gasped, and ran across the room to throw her arms around her parents and kiss them both. Later, she told Trixie that she had never acted so impulsively before, but in her anxiety about Jim, she momentarily forgot her shyness. It was the best thing she had ever done, for Mrs. Wheeler forgot her own shyness and hugged Honey, frankly, weeping. My precious baby, she crooned, soothing Honey's hair with one slim, restless hand. I've missed you so, and Daddy did too, so we decided to charter a plane and fly down this morning. Trixie thought Honey's mother was the most beautiful woman she had ever seen, and she looked just the way Honey would look in another 20 years. She was tall and slender, with wavy light brown hair, and she turned her enormous hazel eyes to Trixie and said, holding out her free hand, You're Trixie, I know. Honey has written me so much about you, and this is Jim. Jim smiled and shook hands with Honey's parents. Then he was introduced to Miss Trask and Mr. Rainsford. Mr. Wheeler said with a wide grin, I'd have known you from anywhere, Jim. You look exactly as your dad did when I last saw him. Honey's mother smiled up at her husband. He doesn't look unlike you, Matthew, she said, and added to Jim, Come sit beside me, please. I suppose you know Honey thinks you're just about the most wonderful person on this earth. Jim flushed and turned to Mr. Rainsford. It was nice of you, sir, to come all the way up here from New York to meet me. How did that happen? Trixie demanded. You didn't know we'd found him, Mr. Rainsford? The lawyer's eyes twinkled. No, but something had to be done about him at once. I'm going to South America on Saturday, and I'll be gone for several months. I decided that if you girls hadn't found Jim by now, I'd have to notify the police. I'm sorry I caused you so much trouble, sir, Jim said, finally sitting down beside Honey and her mother. I didn't know, and my stepfather. Don't give him a second thought, Mr. Rainsford said. He turned to Honey's father. Well, Wheeler, what do you think? We don't have to make any permanent arrangements until after you two have tried it out. I think Jim deserves a good home, and I can't think of a better person to look after his inheritance. Mr. Wheeler laughed. I'll take good care of his money. But as to having me as his guardian, well, I think that's up to Jim. Jim looked uncomfortable, and Mrs. Lee with her long, tapering fingers. You don't have to answer now, Jim, she said quietly. We'd like to take out adoption papers right away, but it wouldn't be fair not to give you a chance to get to know us better first. Jim grinned, his embarrassment gone. It isn't that, Mrs. Wheeler, he said sincerely. I know Honey, and there isn't anyone I'd rather have for a sister. But you and Mr. Wheeler don't know anything about me. We know more than you think, Mrs. Wheeler said quickly. Trixie couldn't keep silent another minute. He's just great, Mrs. Wheeler, she exploded, and then she told them all about how Jim had taken care of Joanne and had fixed the tire on the trailer thief's van, and how Mrs. Smith wanted him to stay with her forever and ever. If you don't adopt him, she will, Trixie finished breathlessly, while Jim, who had tried to interrupt her several times, sighed aloud with relief. Oh, heck, he groaned. Trixie's trying to make me out a hero. Don't pay any attention to her. Honey reached over and tapped her father's knee to get his attention. Please, Daddy, she begged. Adopt Jim right this minute. You don't know Mrs. Smith. She's the smartest woman I ever heard of. If you don't watch out, she'll get him first. Jim burst into laughter. Mrs. Smith will have her hands full with that Darnell family. He sobered suddenly and said to Mr. Wheeler, I don't know how you feel about it, sir, but as far as I'm concerned, I'd consider myself very lucky if you'd consider trying me out for the rest of the summer. Consider? Mr. Wheeler's sandy brown eyebrows shot up. We've been trying to tell you for the past half hour that we would consider ourselves lucky if you'd consider having us. Mrs. Wheeler broke in with a tinkling little laugh. Oh, Matthew, she giggled, you and all your considers. For heaven's sakes, tell the boy and Mr. Rainsford that they consider the matter settled. Now you're doing it, Mother, Honey smiled. Oh, Jim, it is settled, isn't it? Jim's green eyes sparkled, and a slow grin spread over his freckled face. From where I sit, it is, sis. So you'd better watch your step from now on. Trixie knew she was going to burst into tears of joy any minute, so she jumped up and ran out. She turned as a husky voice behind her, said, They're waiting for you at a table inside. Jim gave her a little push. In you go, kid. I'm top man around here now. Trixie tossed her head, grinning. Just wait till Brian and Mark come back from camp, Jim Frayne. Then we'll see who's boss around here. But she followed Jim meekly through the door, already planning the fun they would have during the warm September days before school opened. She and Honey would learn to shoot so they could go hunting with the boys in the fall, and in the winter there would be sledding down the steep hill from the Wheelers' house and skating on the lake. Sometimes, she decided, dreams do come true. And if you just listened to this and it was your last chapter, you have now graduated and you are able to check these books out for me. Hope you like them. What's next? What's next? I'm thinking The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because it's a beautiful tale. It's so imaginative, and there's a whole series that goes along with it. So my sly little plan, it is a plan. It is a carefully set trap for you that you would learn to love these series. You see, if I can get you hooked on this, you'll read more. If I can get you hooked on the Chronicles of Narnia, you'll want to read more. And that's my little trick, to trick you into reading. Because when you read, you get smarter. See how that works? That's my job, to make you smarter. And it's your job now to make yourself smarter. So get to reading. And I'm going to get on this cake here. Delicious. So good. Yeah, I'm going to end here. We're going to end.